Nightstalker. Nightstalker is the true embodiment of the space assassin. Stealth incarnate. All of their abilities and all of their subclasses play into this idea of slinking around in the night, sneaking up on a target, and taking it out with one good clean shot. Nightstalker, for me, and as well as much of the community, is one of their favorite subclasses of all time. But how is it going to fare when Bungie eventually changes how the subclasses work to fit the more flexible style of the stasis subclass? I got a few ideas. Welcome back, Guardians, to another TDT video. I'm your humble host, Meeson777. It has been a minute since we have done one of these videos. If you're not familiar, what we do is we rework some of the subclasses so that they fit within a stasis style of subclass selection. We want to make sure that we maintain the flavor, and we want to make sure that we add a little bit of power, so some of the stuff that's maybe not that interesting right now, to the already existing subclasses. The whole idea is that this can be slotted in the aspect and fragment style that the stasis subclass is currently equipped, and I want to start from the most spiciest and most newest ideas that obviously we're going to see here, and I'm going to talk about the fragments first. The basic stuff is just the melees, the jumps, the dodge, all that other stuff, the grenades. That's not really going to get touched, so we're not really going to go over it this time around. So let's talk about the first fragment here. This is a new one for you. This one's called Veiled Darkness. Now keep in mind here, you're going to be able to move a lot of stuff around, so at face value, this fragment that I'm about to read off to you here isn't going to sound too interesting, but bear with it. Veiled Darkness. Using melees won't remove your invisibility. Now again, face value, that seems kind of pointless. It seems kind of like a wasted fragment slot, but keep in mind, you're going to be able to do things like the vanish and smoke, as well as having things like the top tree Nightstalker's ability to dodge and then vanish and smoke as well. So being able to consistently maintain 100% invisibility uptime by doing things like, say, the bottom tree Nightstalker's vanish and smoke, or maybe you want to melee somebody while you're still invisible, can be quite effective for both PvP and for PvE. By the way, as we're going through this, make sure to let me know in the comment section if something seems a little off. This is, of course, a one-person job as I'm going through this, so if I happen to miss something, maybe a particular interaction that seems a little bit broken, you know, let me know, right? Just drop it in the comment section. I try to read every comment, and these types of videos are my passion. I love game design, so definitely let me know, because I might miss a few things. Also, of course, if you're new, be sure to subscribe. It does help us out a lot. All right, let's roll forward. Next up, we have True Sight. This is something you've already seen before. You might think that this should be a aspect, as this is a little bit more powerful, but I've reworked it a little bit so that it maintains its flavor without losing what really makes it what it is. True Sight reads, crouched precision kills grant a temporary period where you can see enemies through surfaces. Now you might notice that this didn't include the invisibility, because we're going to talk about the invisibility side of the True Sight perk on Middle Tree Nightstalker just a little bit later. Next up, we have Shattering Strike. While invisible, gain increased melee range, and meleeing a target weakens them for a short duration. Did you know that Middle Tree Nightstalker already has this equipped? I didn't, because nobody uses it. Maybe inside a PvE some people use it, but I have never ever heard of a Guardian intentionally trying to set up a Shattering Strike. Now, remember when I talked about Veiled Darkness just a few minutes ago? I sure hope you did, because that would be very concerning if your memory is not that long. Now, I want you to imagine, right? Because right now, with the Middle Tree Nightstalker setup, if you try to throw that smoke, you're not going to get the Shattering Strike effect. You actually have to run up and physically knife something point blank in order for it to trigger this effect. This tends to be way too unwieldy to ever have any serious use. So instead, with Veiled Darkness and Shattering Strike all in combination with one another, you'll be able to safely get the Shattering Strike debuff on a target from a distance. Now, of course, this debuff would need to be not nearly as strong as something like a tether in order to warrant other things to be used, but I think a fair increase in the damage could be pretty nice. Maybe not on the level of Oppressive Darkness if you've seen some of the other seasons' artifact mods, but something along those lines. Effectively, if you get invisibility, and remember, this is just off of invisibility, so if you dodge and you get invisibility, you have the ability to throw a Shattering Strike melee. Maybe you have Veiled Darkness on as well, yeet the smoke bomb at the boss, and suddenly it's taking a little bit more damage. Pretty cool, right? It gets better. Let's keep rolling. Next up, I wanted to get into the chunk of things that play into a more support style. In fact, the lore behind the Nightstalker itself kind of implies it's more of a support style subclass, at least originally. It wants to give orbs of light to teammates, and it wants to get invisible. So it's sort of like a combat medic in a weird way, like a stealthy combat medic. It's really interesting. And of course, we can see this really, really well on bottom tree Nightstalker with its ability to get light of the pack, heart of the pack, and its haste buffs and such. So this is what I have for this one in order to maintain that playstyle. Light of the pack. Shadowshot generates more orbs. Shadowshot grants you and allies bonus super damage the more times you have tethered a target. The idea here is that if you want to go hard in on burning down a boss, rather than having this long drawn out period of extra bonus damage that you can get from, let's say, just top tree tether, you can go for bottom tree tether, put a bunch of shots into the boss or to whatever enemy you're going for, and then that Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun is able to deal a ridiculous amount of damage. This bonuses all of your supers. This opens up bottom tree tether as a better option, you know, the quiver tether, as being just a better option for just burst DPS, whereas top tree tether is better for more long and drawn out and more general DPS. Obviously bottom tree, as we have it here, only benefits the supers, so you'd have to coordinate your supers in order to get this to work, but you wouldn't have the extended duration like the top trees did. The problem that I was having with this when I was looking through this in terms of a PvE standpoint is that bottom tree tether really doesn't have too much of a place inside of PvE outside of what it can do in terms of just general weapon haste and such, but at the higher end of things, you just want more boss damage. So why not just give us some more options? It's not strictly better, as it does have a little bit more restrictions, and it's more of a burst rather than a drawn out period, but it is something to keep in mind if particular bosses might suit this a little bit better. Maybe certain encounters where the boss only exposes itself to damage phase for a short period of time, this could be more helpful. Next up, we have combat provision. Damaging targets with grenades grants melee energy. Making your allies invisible grants grenade energy. So essentially it's the same idea that we have right now in bottom tree, where you're able to kind of get this flip-flop back and forth between your melee and your grenade. This is just a good way to keep some general uptime. Of course, you'd have to make your allies invisible, which can be a bit tricky, so obviously you're going to want to run the vanish and smoke in order to get this effect. And I've also made it a little bit easier in order to get the effects between the two, as grenade damage just gives you the melee energy anyway, and it feeds into itself a little bit better. So if you want to be a little more selfless with this, this is a good way to go. Next up, we have lockdown. Grenades and smoke effects last twice as long. Currently, this only works for grenades, and I don't see a reason why we can't make the smoke effects also last a little bit longer. You could do things like the Envenomed, which we will talk about for the melees later, have a little bit more of that slow effect on it. You could make your invisibility last a little bit longer, which could open up some really cool things, let's say with the Graviton Forfeit, which hardly gets used. Or you want to do things where your smoke bomb, the one that hangs out in place and pings enemies' radar on PvP, which is hilarious by the way, actually sits there just a little bit longer and annoys people for a little bit longer, and maybe makes that smoke last a little bit longer. General, better crowd control options for this tether. The next three fragments play into the idea of being a scout, something that top tree's kind of good at. Its whole kit plays into this idea of marking targets and staying off of enemies' radars at the same time, generally being able to track things a little bit easier. So I wanted to play into that with this next three bunch. First up, we have marked shots. This is a new fragment that you haven't seen anywhere else before. It's a slight rework of something we already have. Damaging a target with a smoke or tethering enemies marks them for easy tracking. This already happens on top tree tether, but let's be honest, it's not that helpful. Maybe for some very close edge cases in PvP, maybe a target gets tethered and then they run away. You might be able to, get a beat on them a little bit easier. It's all right there, but generally speaking, you're wanting to throw down a tether to kill someone anyway, and if they're not getting killed outright, it feels kind of like a waste. Making it also tag people and mark them with smoke hits makes it a lot more valuable as a tool, and people will actually have to make the decision, do I want to run this or something else? And this is really cool in particular for my playstyle, as you're seeing in the background here. I love to bait people with this smoke. So if they run in head first and get a face full of smoke, I'll actually get a mark on them as to where they are. I'm debating whether this should be for all teammates or just for yourself, so let me know what you think in the comments. Of course, marking enemies in PvE is basically pointless because of course they're tethered. You can see that with your own eyeballs. You don't need a lot of help with that. If you tether a boss, well, duh, of course the boss is tethered, so it doesn't really change anything in PvE, but it does help things for PvP. It could be quite useful as a tool to gather information. But you're gonna have to make a pretty difficult decision, because what about Predator, enhanced sprint, and crouch speeds? Now, this doesn't seem like too much for PvE at face value, but the ability to move around the map a little bit easier in PvP can be quite helpful. I know in particular for me, if I had to make the choice between marked shots and Predator, it would be difficult, because I do like that increased sprint speed, and being able to crouch around a little bit easier and stay off the radar can be quite helpful as well. Let me know what you think. Which one would you choose between the two? Lastly, for our last fragment, we have Keen Scout, gain an enhanced radar. It's short, it's simple, it is very, very nice to have. I'm even considering possibly reworking the marked shot to have essentially kind of taking the smoke side of thing and putting it into the enhanced radar, but I really think that enhanced radar is pretty damn good. I'm finding it difficult how we could really make this work in terms of PvE, as information like this isn't super valuable. Let me know if you have an idea of how some of this should work in PvE, because gathering information isn't that helpful, but I want to make sure maybe we don't make it too powerful in PvP. So the line is difficult to draw, especially because we're breaking out some of these things, like the top tree tethers no longer bound to all of these fragments. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult to make sure that everything stays with one another, making it both viable in PvP and PvE. Let's talk about some of the aspects. First of all, we have Heart of the Pack. Damage with void abilities and making allies invisible grants increased mobility, recovery, resilience, and weapon haste to you and nearby allies. This is something that we already have, but I've made it to where it's a little bit easier to get access to this buff, allowing you to keep this buff active on your teammates for a little bit longer. Vanish and Smoke in PvE can be quite good as a clutch tool to get your allies up from a res position, so this could be a great way to kind of keep that up a little bit longer. The haste, the regeneration, the resilience, the mobility, all of that good stuff can stay up a little bit more because it also triggers on, say, like your grenade effects as well. Next up, we have Flawless Execution. Crouched precision shots grant invisibility. Higher tier enemies award a longer duration. So this is something that we've already seen on the middle tree tether. I wanted to make sure that this didn't get changed too much. As you noticed, True Sight and this Flawless Execution have now been broken up. If you want to get this invisibility as well as that ability to see targets through walls, you're going to have to slot both. Lastly, we have Vanishing Step. This is the ability to dodge and become invisible. I don't think this needs any change whatsoever. This is an excellent tool. Hunters love to dodge. This rewards their dodge, modifies their dodge. It's great. I don't think this needs to be changed. It's already easily accessible and has some pretty clear benefits. All right, let's move on to the super modifying aspects. These are aspects that are directly tied to how you use your super. By the way, some people have thrown out in the comment section that these aspects, these fragments, I'm doing them wrong, that these fragments should be something that is applicable to all of the classes. But I would like to argue that being that we already have well-established and decently balanced subclasses for the light-based subclasses, why can't we make them a little bit more specialized, being that darkness is kind of doing its own thing anyway? So yes, I would say that fragments should stay within their lane, so the Nightstalker fragments will stay as the Nightstalker fragments, and the Nightstalker aspects will actually modify their super, something that people have argued with me and said, that's not how that's supposed to work, but I say, why the hell not? Anyway, rolling forward. Spectral Blades, unchanged. I don't think that this needs any major reworks. It's good for clearing ads. It's terrifying in PvP. The other fragments and such you could keep in mind will play into this. In particular, think about Veiled Darkness. The very first fragment that I talked about doesn't break your invisibility when you use a melee. Now, put 2 and 2 together. Nightstalker, when you're invisible, is technically, whenever using that knife, it is a melee attack. So if you have both Veiled Darkness and you're using Spectral Blades, you could stay permanently invisible while you're slashing and dashing through the map. If that doesn't sound terrifying, I'm not sure what does, because that sounds super cool, but you're gonna have to spec for it specifically, something that can be quite interesting to do in terms of PvP. I don't know, might be a bit strong. Maybe we just remove that ability so that when you're in the Spectral Blades, it doesn't take it away, but I'm sure a lot of PvE players in particular would love the idea to be able to maintain their stealth while they're slashing and dashing through. Let me know if that sounds too strong though. Let's roll forward. Mobius Quiver. This is what I talked about on bottom tree. This is one that doesn't get used that much in terms of boss damage, but I think needs a little bit of love anyway in order to bring it up just a bit in terms of what it can do inside of PvE, as well as making it a slightly more viable option in terms of PvP. It reads as follows. Shadowshot can be fired multiple times. Quiver shots link between themselves, tethering any enemies who pass between them. I want you to think of Anarchy, and essentially I want to put that on a super. So if you quiver an area, it'll then link all of the quivered shots together and it'll form essentially a chain or a net. What you can do with this inside of something, let's say like PvP, something where my heart's at, you can tether between 2 points and then create this line that says, hey, you're either going to have to Mission Impossible your way over this line like a laser beam, or you're going to have to just take the tether. This is a much better way to shut down an absolute just deny an area. Think about if you had a big archway, like one of those ones that are on like Midtown when you're on the C flag area, I think it is, that big archway. Just imagine well, a net. I guess it would kind of look like a pentagram. It's not intentional, but imagine a net of these tethers just completely saying no to that doorway and forcing them to take a longer route, allowing them to burn super energy a little bit faster. This allows for much better area control, and I think it makes the bottom tree tether a little bit better as a tether option. I know I'm ranting on this a bit, but tether, honestly, is one of the worst, if not the worst super in PvP, and it's only really viable in terms of PvE because of the orbs of power it gives and the general benefits it gives from top tree tether being able to hang out for a little bit longer. So all of these things combined, I think would make it as a whole a much better option. But we haven't even talked about possibly one of the most ground shaking changes that I'm going to propose here to tether. That's on top tree tethers. Top tree tether is called Deadfall. The change I'm bringing to it is Shadowshot gains increased velocity, tether range, impact damage, and duration. Shots become traps that wait for prey. Now, the idea here is that if Golden Gun is sort of think of it like a high impact scout rifle, or I know this is mind-blowing, a hand cannon, tether I think is obviously a bow or a sniper rifle, but it doesn't really feel like it. It's slow and it's difficult to get off, especially if a super's rushing you down in PvP, and in PvE it's just let me just tether this thing and apply a debuff to it. What this does now is that the actual velocity that the arrow travels and the impact that it has is a lot more deadly. In PvP, if you were to directly hit a target with the tether, they would die outright, and it's ironic that it doesn't already do that. I am really not sure as to why. It's basically a shutdown super, and if you compare it to literally any other shutdown super, it's just a strictly worse version of it. Hell, even things like bottom tree vortex on the Voidwalker subclass is just a better option, because not only does it instantly kill whatever it hits, but it also will linger there in an area and deal damage to it, like top tree tether, but also actually doing something about the target that's inside of it, rather than slowing them down and requiring you to do more work. So making this into a one and done, more viable option for shutting something down is a much better idea, I think, than having it be where it currently is, where it's just a bit too slow and a bit too cumbersome. Of course, it maintains all of the cool stuff that it did previously. It bumps it up slightly in PvE, but that initial impact damage wouldn't be as noticeable. Of course, we could turn it down just a little bit if we wanted to. We could adjust it as we need to. Bungie has shown that they're able to somewhat separate the sandboxes, so I think this is a much better option for how top tree tether should work. Makes it like a sniper rifle, makes it a much better shutdown option than it currently is. And that about covers it. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. If you have, like I said, consider hitting the subscribe button, hitting the bell. I don't ever ask for that, but it's something you should probably do anyway. Leave a comment if you have an idea of your own or rework of your own. I also take the exotic ideas. I know you guys like to post them here as well. Say hello to Scapegoat, who did the edits for this video. I think he did a fantastic job. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Share it around. Bless your faces, and deuces.